Now, the American President Donald Trump appears to be in a bit of a fix. He's unable to wriggle out of the Iran war, with Tehran refusing to agree for a deal on American terms. On the domestic front, the road to midterms appears tougher than before, with the fallout of Epstein files and also his approval ratings now plunging to 36%. And amidst this, a weakened Trump is visiting China from the 13th till the 15th of May. This marks the first visit to China by an American president in more than 8 years. To begin with, Trump is set to meet with his counterpart Xi Jinping on Thursday morning, followed by a visit to UNESCO heritage site of the Temple of Heaven. And then there's going to be a state banquet in the evening. On Friday, both leaders will meet again for tea and lunch before Trump returns to Washington. Now, trade and business will feature high on the agenda, and at least about 16 top CEOs, including Tesla's Elon Musk, Apple's Tim Cook, Boeing's Kelly Ortberg, and General Electric's Larry Culp, will be a part of Trump's delegation. Now, amidst the endeavor to boost bilateral ties, Taiwan remains a major sticking point, although Trump has paused weapons sales worth about $11 billion to Taiwan that was announced in December last year. He's set to raise this issue with Xi Jinping.
Well, I'm going to have that discussion with President Xi. President Xi would like us not to, and I'll have that discussion. That's one of the many things I'll be talking about.
But Beijing has drawn a red line, opposing the American bid to sell weapons to Taiwan. It also has hit out at the Trump administration's sanctions against 3 people and 9 companies for aiding Iran's shipment of oil to China.
During President Donald Trump's visit to China, the two heads of state will have an in-depth exchange of views on major issues concerning China-U.S. relations, as well as world peace and development. China's opposition to the U.S. sale of weapons to Taiwan is consistent and clear.
Now, this juncture, though, Iran is likely to dominate the talks, being Iran's largest trading partner, which purchases roughly 90% of its sanctioned crude oil, considering its high stakes in reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. officials are reportedly pinning their hopes on Beijing to put pressure on Iran to make concessions. Now, this assumes significance at a time when the American president has stated that the ceasefire is on a massive life support. And according to reports, some Trump aides reckon that he's seriously considering resumption of major combat operations. He's also met with his national security team at the White House, and just hours before his departure, Trump shared some images that reflect his state of mind on the Iran war. While one showed the destruction of the Iranian boats, another post showed drones being shot down by lasers. So that is what Trump is thinking. Lasers, bing, bing, gone. But Tehran, though, remains unfazed with these threats coming from the American president. The Iranian parliamentary spokesperson Ibrahim Rezai has hinted that the country could actually enrich uranium up to 90%, a level that's considered weapons grade, if the Americans and the Israelis decide to resume their war on Iran again. Now, Trump's visit also holds significance from an economic perspective. Yuan is at its strongest levels against the US dollar in about 3 years. And last year, Beijing had played its trump card to counter Trump's tariff war by restricting the rare earth exports. While the US president initially threatened to levy about 100% more tariffs on China, he announced a trade and an economic deal with China in November 2025. And according to him, China has promised to eliminate export controls on rare earth elements and other critical minerals, end its retaliation against US semiconductor manufacturers, and resume purchase of soybeans. And now it is worth noting that Trump's last visit to China in November 2017 had played out in a very different context. He had completed over a year in office back then. Business deals worth about $250 billion were inked, including a $37 billion sale of 300 Boeing aircraft to China. Now, that is not all. Trump was also given a rare private tour of the Forbidden City by Xi Jinping. And ahead of Trump's visit, the residents of China shared some mixed feelings. While some expressed hope of a new economic deal between the two sides, others perceived Trump's arrival as a sign of China's global clout.
The fact Trump is coming proves that we are powerful. Trump is a snobbish person who changes his face whenever he wants, so we should respond to his changes with constancy.
Now, the outcome of the Trump-Xi meeting is likely to have implications for India as well, especially in the current geopolitical scenario. And amidst this, the Indian Prime Minister's powerful message stands out, recalling how India had bravely dealt with sanctions that were imposed after the Pokhran nuclear tests in 1998. The Indian Prime Minister asserted that no power in the world can make India bow under pressure. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Dr. Charles Kupchan, who's a senior fellow of the Council of Foreign Relations. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Dr. Kupchan, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, Donald Trump will be traveling to Beijing, and some people say that the peace or a peace deal with Iran may actually have to go through Beijing. But for that, Donald Trump will have to make some major concessions. What's your reading of this?
Well, I think that Donald Trump has at the top of his agenda when he arrives in China, Chinese help on ending the war in the Gulf, ending the conflict with Iran. And that's because this is a war that has not turned out as Trump expected. I think he thought it would last a week, the regime would fall, and it would all be over. Now we have a huge disruption to global energy supplies. There is a ceasefire, but there's also fighting. The gap between the U.S. and the Iranian position appears to be as large as ever. As you said just a minute ago, Trump dismissed out of hand the most recent Iranian response. If there is a party that can put pressure on Iran, it is China. And that's because China is Iran's economic and diplomatic lifeline. They can put the pressure on the regime in Iran that it may need to get that country, those leaders, to make a deal. Will Xi Jinping be ready to do that? He hasn't done it on Ukraine. Will he do it on Iran? I think it in part depends on what he can get in return. And I think that will involve both something on Taiwan as well as the broader issue of U.S.-China trade relations.
That's interesting. Now, China is the nation that purchases 90% of the Iranian oil, which is why China is Iran's lifeline to go on fighting this war. But in your assessment, what incentive do you think the Chinese will have to help Donald Trump get out of the hole that he has got himself in by starting this war with Iran?
You know, I think that the Chinese have mixed feelings about helping Trump end the war. On the one hand, this is a war that works to China's advantage because it distracts the United States from the Indo-Pacific. U.S. ships, personnel, or arms are flowing to the Middle East. They're not flowing to allies in Asia, and they're also not flowing to Ukraine. And in that respect, it helps Russia's partner. It helps China's partner, the Russians. On the other hand, this is a war that is disrupting global trade. The Chinese benefit from global trade. It is a war that is disrupting energy markets, and the Chinese rely heavily on imports from the Persian Gulf for their energy. So I do think that the Chinese have an incentive to help Trump end this war. That having been said, I do think that they will need something in return. And in some ways, I think the biggest prize out there is, will they be able to strike some kind of reset with Trump? Will they be able to significantly de-escalate U.S.-China confrontation and animosity, which has been building for years? I think Trump is the guy that would do that.
Right.
Because he's very pragmatic and transactional. Let's see if the Chinese are ready to take up that opportunity.
It'll be very interesting to see as to what happens when Donald Trump meets with Xi Jinping. But thank you very much indeed, Dr. Charles Kupchan, for joining us with that perspective there.
Bye-bye.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.